It's an absolute joy to be here this morning. You know, about 10 years ago, this place is kind of like an Ebenezer for me. I met a lot of just wonderful people that changed the course of my life in this very room. I remember there was a conference here, so we showed up early because we wanted to get a good seat. And so we got here so early that we were the only ones here. And so we walk in and, you know, Amber's kind of like, you rushed us and now we're the first ones here. And then we saw Annie Poonen come out of that room right here, and she had a little baby, I think it was Xavier, and she was holding Xavier, and she came right up to us and introduced herself. And then later that day, I met a man named Benoit James, right about there. He was from Austin, Texas, and eventually we would move to Austin and become part of the church there. And as I'm talking to Benoit, I'm telling him the story of how we were introduced to the new covenant. In the middle of the story, Benoit stops me and he goes, "You need to come tell Zach that story." And he's already taken off. I'm in the middle of the story and I'm not ready to talk to Zach yet. Never met the guy. I was a little intimidated, but it was one of many times that Benoit James would take me out of my comfort zone. And it was wonderful. And later that after lunch, downstairs, I remember meeting Santosh for the first time. And he told me of how when he came to the U.S. from India for college, he said that he got homesick. And he was describing it, and I was like, yeah, I can see how you get homesick. And I was thinking that he was talking about for his friends or for his family, his parents. I thought he was really missing his parents, and he said, I was homesick for a church. And I never heard that. And it challenged me, like, Lord, what kind of church? You know, because in the military we visit a lot of churches, and I can't say I ever, longed for it the way that he described. So I'm thankful that today I have a church that I miss when I'm not there. So God is so good. I thought this morning I would, that was 10 years ago. Yeah. Is that better? Okay. I thought I would share a little bit, over the course of 10 years, something that happened in my life that really revealed more of the Lord to me. I shared, a little bit. I moved to Austin and became part of the church there, but when I first visited here, I was in the active duty Air Force, and I was a mechanic in the Air Force. I worked on fighter jets. And I decided really at that conference to get out of active duty and join the reserves, like go part-time to the military. And that involved a change of career for me. I went from being a mechanic to being a paralegal. I worked in legal. And a paralegal, in the civilian world, they call it a legal assistant. It's just an assistant. It's a legal helper, if you will. And I like that title, helper. And Jesus in John 14:16, he kind of referred to himself as a helper. And he said, when I go away, I'll send another helper. And that's the Holy Spirit. So I like the title. The world may not appreciate the assistant or the apprentice or the helper, but I'm kind of honored to have a title of helper. So I was a legal helper, and I thought I would share 3 things that I learned by being a legal helper. And the first one was quite simply that God's judgments are perfectly just. Now that sounds obvious, and I would agree if you told me that. I wouldn't argue with you at any time, but I discovered it a little more intimately, and I'll tell you how. My first assignment as a paralegal in the Air Force was in a section called military justice. They nicknamed it, they just dropped the military, and the way we refer to it, we say, I work in justice. And it's ironic, I guess, that a man who had received so much mercy from the Lord would work in something called justice. And to make it a little more real for you, I worked on the team that represented the United States government or the United States Air Force in crimes where we were the prosecution. So now I'm having to work on a team that the goal is to get the maximum sentence we can in a court-martial. And to make it a little more real for you, on the charge sheet, when we bring the charges, we refer to the defendant not as the defendant, we refer to them as the accused. And so that would make me the accuser. Is that a little more real? So I would sit in these courts-martials, and during the trial, every trial, remember I did this part-time. I had a civilian job, and I would do this part-time for about a month each year. And every court-martial I was a part of, it felt like the Lord handpicked for me. And every one of them, I could identify with the accused. And I could honestly say, the Lord showed me, there but for the grace of God go I. And I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, when I would sit through these trials, I would want to crawl out of my own skin. I saw the rottenness of my own flesh, and I'm watching these men and women go to prison for a long time for things that, it's not that just had I made one or two decisions, I would be in the same spot. It would be like if you just changed my circumstances a little bit, I would go and I would be the one gathering evidence, and I would be the one trying to help the attorneys to get them the maximum punishment. That was very, very difficult for me. And I remember one court-martial in particular. It was actually right before I moved to Austin. I remember doing my Air Force duty, and I heard about an accident that had happened where a guy on a motorcycle was killed. And I heard that the person driving the car had been drinking. And there was part of me that said, okay, well, I'll be gone for a year. I won't have to deal with this. I'm glad I don't have to be on the prosecution side of that. Guess what? That trial waited 1 year. It took a year to go to trial, and it waited until I came back and I got to be on it. And I presented this in a message one time in Austin, and I said, hey, I want you guys to do this, and I want you guys to do it too. I said, I want you to imagine that you're a judge, right? Now, you don't need any legal training. The part that you need to do is really very simple. And in some ways, you're more qualified to do it than some of the judges are. And here's why I say that. I worked at a base one time where I saw the parking lots of where the judges park. And I saw something that really disturbed me. In the judge's parking spot, now I don't know if that was his car or not, but on the back there was that Darwin fish. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was the fish with the legs. And it really bothered me, it really disturbed me that somebody that makes decisions on how long to send somebody to prison has no fear of God. So you brothers and sisters have a fear of God, and you want to get this right? So I'm giving you permission to judge. I'm asking you to judge. I want you to do it because I think this exercise will be a little better if you're forced to decide how long a person that has been drinking and driving and hits a motorcycle and kills the man on the motorcycle, how long should they go to prison? And I'll tell you the range. You can give them anywhere from 0 to 10.5 years according to the law. Okay? So you have your number? Somebody that kills somebody who they've been drinking and driving, they kill somebody on a motorcycle, you can give them from 0 to 10.5 years. Now, lest you think that 0 is them getting off scot-free, not quite. In this trial, the girl that was driving the car, through tears in her eyes, she confessed to it. She said, I'm guilty. Does that weigh on your decision more than if we had to go to trial and we had to find her guilty and present all the evidence? Through tears, she gave an unsworn statement. She said, every day of my life, I'll have to live with what I did. If I could bring him back, I would. She was in tears. Now, how much does that play into your decision? Do you believe her? Does that make you take a few months off or add a few months if you don't believe her? You know what? She was in her mid-20s and she was unmarried. What would you decide if she was married? Would that change your decision? Would you say, oh, well, maybe we give her a little less or a little more? What if she had children? What if the person that you had to make a determination on, what if she had kids? Would that change your decision? Would you feel like, well, we don't want to send her too long. She's got a family. What if she had a husband or didn't have a husband? Would that change your decision any? She had gotten back from a deployment. She had gone and served in the military and gone overseas for her country. Does that weigh any on your decision? Does it matter that she came from a broken home and that her senior year, things were so bad at home, she had to sleep on the couch of a friend's house? Do you take maybe some time off for that, for the circumstances? Or, maybe you add them more? What if she came from a perfect home, the perfect family, the white picket fence and everything? Does that make a difference in your decision? What about the victim? The victim was an unmarried 50-year-old retired Air Force guy. What if he had a wife? Would you want to add a little bit more because more people are suffering? What if he was married and had 8 kids and he left them behind? Would you add a few more years now because all those kids had to suffer because of, to her sentence do you see how hard this is? Brothers and sisters, I examined all the evidence. I sat through the trial and I realized here's what I decided. I don't know. I know that Josh does not have enough wisdom to know. I don't know how anybody does. And I asked the church at Austin, I said, okay, listen, I need a number. When we're done, I'm going to come up to you and I'm not letting you off the hook. And I pressed hard. I said, I need your number. What is your number? And here's what's interesting. I got everything from 0 to 10.5 years. We're a wonderful body. We love each other. But how could we get this so different? And the ones that would say 0, I would press a little harder and I'd say, where's your sense of justice? Are you kidding? We let people kill and we don't do anything about it. We just let them off, don't send them to prison for any amount of time. And then people that said 10.5 years, where's your sense of mercy? Have you not done anything? Are you without sin and you can get the stone and sentence to the full amount? I had one brother that did some quick math, right? And he said, okay, let's take the average, 5.25. And I kind of laughed at his sense of trying to balance justice and mercy perfectly. And I said, 0.25 even is a long time to spend in prison. 1 day is a long time to spend in prison. This is a serious thing. So I was just surprised at how hard it was for us who fear God to even decide. And this is the lesson. This is one thing I learned very clearly. I want God to judge. I know He's able to see the hearts and motives. He's able to know what's the best for everybody. So I want to leave judgment to Him. That was the first thing I learned. Here's the second thing. In the court martial, you remember my job is the legal helper, right? I was on the side of the accuser, and my job was to do anything I could to help win this case so that we win. And I remember sitting in the courtroom, and the courtroom is very intense, right? There's somebody's life on the line. And I remember sitting there, and the judge, rapped the gavel, and he broke for recess, and he disappeared. And I remember sitting there, and the defendant or the accused is off to my right, and then I'm sitting right behind the prosecution, behind the table, in case the attorneys need me to go research anything or help in any way with the trial. And I remember kind of looking over at her. She was about to be sentenced, and this was the last day she would be free, and she was about to spend, we didn't know at that point how many years in prison, but years in prison. And I remember her attorney got up and walked over to the prosecution and was talking to the opposing attorneys. And it was just about maybe another case or what they were doing this weekend. But I remember that left her at the defendant table all alone. And I remember just thinking, wow, that must be lonely. That must be really lonely knowing you're going to prison and you're all by yourself. Even your attorney's not there with you. And then my imagination started going, and I pictured myself at the judgment day. And I pictured myself with all the charges at me and all alone standing before the judgment seat. And every charge in my heart, I know it's true and I know I'm guilty. And I remember feeling lonely, probably more lonely than her. I'm just sitting there. I'm supposed to, I'm just ready to do my job, but I had some time, so I had time to think. And it felt lonely. And then I sensed that somebody was right next to me. I had an attorney, and just as I'm getting ready to say, how do you plead? I'm ready to say guilty because it's all true. My attorney says, not guilty. I turned to my attorney, and it's Jesus. And it was the first time that I realized that He's an advocate. He's an attorney. He'll represent me. You see, when people get criminal, or get in criminal trouble or legal trouble, they need a good attorney. And good attorneys are expensive, tens of thousands of dollars. I remember one court martial, the guy didn't want the Air Force attorney that was given to him because he didn't think he'd get a fair trial. So he paid $50,000 to bring in a civilian attorney, $50,000. Attorneys are very expensive if they're going to represent you. My attorney was very expensive. Very expensive. It cost him his blood. It cost him his blood. When I drive through cities, even driving on this trip, you see all these billboards for attorneys. And they always have, these very aggressive sounding names like the strong arm or the hammer or the gorilla. If you're in trouble, you hurt, you brought up on charges, call me, I'll fight for you. I'll be in your corner, I'll fight. That's who we want. And that's always a number you can remember. Like, if you ever get in trouble, just keep hitting 4 on your phone and you'll get me, right? Or it's like 1-800 get out of jail. 1-800 don't go to jail. And oh yeah, that's who I want. My attorney, you know what his name is? It's not the hammer, it's not the gorilla, it's not any of those. The righteous. It's in 1 John 2:1. If you've never seeing the beauty of this verse, I want you to imagine this courtroom setting that I'm talking about. And just imagine being on trial. If anybody gets in trouble, if anybody sins, we have an advocate. You know what advocate means? In the Air Force, the attorneys are called JAGs. And JAG stands for Judge, Advocate, General. The advocate is the one that represents, in this case, these JAGs represent the government or the Air Force. So the representatives of the Air Force, they advocate on behalf of the government and the Air Force. My advocate is Jesus. That's what it says so clearly in that verse. And his name is on the billboard. It says, this is what it would say if I'm driving and I see Jesus up there. It would say, if anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. And he purchased the retainer with his own blood. And he's not just some clever attorney that knows all the legal loopholes. He's perfectly just. And he says the only way that, Josh, you can stand up there and say not guilty is what I purchased for you with my own blood. And I saw it different, and it became so real to me that day sitting in that courtroom. I had to fight back tears. Remember, I have a job to do, and in my mind, this imagination, the tears are starting to flow, and I'm fighting them off. And I couldn't look at the girl that was sitting there about to go to prison. It's pretty intimidating. So that was the second thing. The final thing, the third thing I'll share, the last few years I kind of got away from military justice. And I'm so thankful to. I didn't like going through all the evidence and going through all the, just all the way of being an accuser felt. I was thankful to be out of that. And I moved into more of a general law type area. And one of the things that we do for members that are like deploying and about to go off to war, we help them with legal instruments like wills and powers of attorney and advanced medical directives. Basically, these things say what will happen in the event of the military member's death. So, like, for example, if they're newly married and they got a young kid, we would draft the documents that say what should happen, how would they be taken care of if the war takes this member's life. And so I did some of that. And because I was at a base that had a large percentage of retirees, I wound up drafting wills for older retirees, like in their 70s or 80s, that had kids in their 40s or 50s, and they would change them often because a kid would make them mad, and so they would disinherit them from the will. Those weren't as exciting. I mean, when you're putting this together, you get kind of a life story, and you see what happened. And there's a lot of divorces and remarriages in the military, and you can just see the strife and the fighting. I can't say I enjoyed that, but in some ways it was better than the military justice side. But what I noticed when I'm drafting these documents, I noticed in my Bible the word inheritance a lot more often, or inherit, or heir, that there's an inheritance for us. And that became a little more real through working in legal, that we have an inheritance. That I learned early as a kid the way an inheritance works. When I was 7, my grandpa died. And I remember I got a Swiss Army knife. It was about that big, and it had the tweezers on one side and on the other side a toothpick that my grandpa had used excessively, I think. It was a little gross when you're 7, but hey, my grandpa left this for me. I'm not advocating that 7-year-olds should have knives, by the way. You take that up with your parents, but this is what I got. I got a little knife. When I was 10, my grandma died. And I remember I was left with a porcelain turtle. It was about this big, and when you lifted the candy shell, or the turtle shell, there was candy inside. And I guess my grandma thought of me and thought Josh would like that. And I didn't get to keep it, though. I remember my mom come and said, hey, can we give that to your great uncle? And at 10, I was like, can I have the candy? He can have the turtle. But I learned at a young age that the way it works, the way an inheritance works, is somebody dies and you get something. Now, that's a little more complicated than just that, isn't it? There's a lot of emotion and there's a lot of grief that comes. When the will's being drafted, it's almost very matter of fact. Okay, this is what I want to happen. This is the way my estate should look, and this is what I want, who I want to take care of my kids. This is where I want my car to go, my house to go, my everything else to go. But whenever a will's being read, it's a little more emotional. There's definitely a grief. You've lost a loved one. And there's a part of you that's wondering what you're going to get, but feels an immediate guilt because of it. Because you're only getting because somebody died. And I think you know where I'm going with this, right? When you read in the scriptures and you read of the inheritance that we get. And there's a verse in Ephesians, I think it's 1:12 or 1:14, that says that we're given the Holy Spirit as a down payment on a future inheritance. In other words, we're receiving some of the inheritance now because somebody died. And it's just wonderful that the Bible that speaks like this and talks about an inheritance that we get. And I decided to draft a will one morning. I woke up and I just said, I'm going to take a lot of that language that I write, that I put into these legal documents, and I want to write a will using a little bit of my imagination. So I imagined a will being written in Jerusalem in like 33 AD. And so I kind of put that together, and that's what I'll close with. I'll share that with you. Before I do that, I'll just recap the two things before that. So I said I had 3 points. I said I learned 3 things, right? God is perfectly just. And when it comes to judgment, I want his judgment. Even in areas where I have to make judgments or decisions, I want his help because I can't see really anything. And so I need to depend on him if I have to make any type of decision that requires any type of judgment. I learned that very clearly. And the second thing, the billboard. My hope is that if you don't remember anything else, when you see those billboards of attorneys when you're driving, I want you to think of 1 John 2:1. If anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. I want that to be the billboard, the billboard that you think of when you think of your attorney, when you see other attorneys advertising. And then the final thing is an inheritance. That we have an inheritance that has been purchased for us by somebody dying. So I'll close with the will I drafted. I used a little bit of my imagination in doing it, but I think you'll be able to follow it. Remember the setting whenever a will is being read, when it's being put into use, right? It's a lot of grief. Not necessarily with this one. There's a lot of joy in this one because the one that died rose again. So it's not as sad and somber, but it's wonderful. So here's the will. It says, I, Jesus, son of Joseph the carpenter, son of God my Father in heaven, a resident of Nazareth in the region of Galilee, currently residing in Jerusalem, make, publish, and declare this instrument to be my last will and testament, revoking all wills and codicils at any time heretofore made by me. I, being of sound mind, do hereby declare that upon my death, my mercy would be given to Joshua Daniel McGuire, a future resident of Pflugerville, Texas, to forgive his sins, cleanse his heart, and renew his mind. Also, I desire that my grace would be poured out upon him so that he can be justified to approach my Father's throne and refer to him from that day forward as Dad. Next, I give my estate to Josh, including every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places, and grant him everything pertaining to life and godliness. The only exception is my glory that remains with my Father, his Dad. Further, I give him my Holy Spirit to lead him into a greater holiness and godliness all the days of my life. Finally, I give him my hope that one day he will have my eternal life in all its fullness, and that he will finally be satisfied when he looks into my eyes and sees himself in my exact likeness. I do hereby execute, publish, and declare this instrument to be my last will and testament, and do so of my own free will in the presence of many witnesses. Signed, Jesus. When they do a card trick, they, very often they'll put the card, in a place you don't expect. I drafted this back in Texas about a week or two ago, and I was going to close with these verses. And it's interesting, they're the same verses we closed the song with. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart. His wounds have paid my ransom. Thank you, brothers and sisters. God bless you.